Good evening and welcome to the International Great Black Read Aloud Day 2026. We are delighted to be here with you and read to you. We have been reading for 15 days so far. It's day 16, and we are excited and delighted that we are continuing our reading streak. We're doing much better than we did last year with our voice, and that keeps us excited. Today is Jazz and Music Day, and my name is LD Robinson, and I am your reader here at the International Great Black Read Aloud Day, or TIGBRAD as we call it. Today is Jazz and Music Day, and we have a great selection today. We will be reading to you. And so we thank you for tuning in. We want to let you know that we are here giving voice to words written by Black people all around the world, and that we are on a mission to encourage the exploration, purchase, and reading of books written by Black people. We do our readings for educational purposes, and that is our sole reason. It is to introduce the myriad of genres that are available, the diverse offerings that are available in literature by Black people. And so it is our pleasure to be here doing this with you for what is now our sixth year. Started out being just a day, it was the vision, but it has turned into something that we enjoy. Hopefully, you enjoy from the feedback that we get. We are glad that you're tuning in and that you're listening. And so today, our selection for jazz and music comes from Thelonious Monk, the excuse me, The Life and Times of an American Original by Robin D.G. Kelley. And this is the story is very it is a very interesting story of such a iconic person in music, I would say. And so we're going to read from the prelude, and we're going to read from another chapter, which my mama didn't want me to be in the South, something. Okay, so we'll get to that. So let's read. I have a choice here between writing about Monk as he is, or as he seems to be, and is generally thought to be. There isn't any great difficulty about it, because both sides are fertile ground. The stories merely differ in plausibility. And this is from critic Paul Bacon in 1949. Bonetta Smith, affectionately known as Teenie, loved to visit her Aunt Nellie and Uncle Thelonious. For a kid growing up in the late 50s and early 60s, the Monks' tiny ground floor apartment at 243 West 63rd Street must have seemed almost carnivalesque. Uncle Thelonious sat at the piano turning Christmas carols into Monk originals, or holding forth with a string of friendly put-downs or challenging questions about the ways of the world. Aunt Nellie chatted away, sometimes entertaining the kids with wild and wonderful stories, sometimes cursing booking agents, managers, and anyone else who took advantage of her dear husband, sometimes gently scolding one of her nieces to not bang on the piano. Their two children, Toot Thelonious Jr. and Boo Boo Barbara, added to the drama and the fun. They were full of energy, and parents encouraged them to express themselves freely. The apartment in the neighborhood became a playground for Teeny's six siblings, as well as her cousins and their family friends. Uncle Baby, Thelonious' younger brother Thomas, lived a couple doors down, so his four children were always in the mix. Like all his nieces and nephews, Teeny treated her uncle as an uncle, not as some eccentric genius or celebrity. During one of her many visits in 1959 or 60, when she was about 12 years old, Teeny noticed a book of compositions by Chopin perched on her uncle's rented Steinway baby grand piano. Monk's piano was notorious for its clutter. It occupied a significant portion of the kitchen and extended into the front room. The lid remained closed, since it doubled as a temporary storage space for music, miscellaneous papers, magazines, folded laundry, dishes, and any number of stray kitchen items. Teeny thumbed through the pages of the Chopin book, then turned to her uncle and asked, "What are you doing with that on the piano? I thought you couldn't read music. You can read that?" The challenge was on. In response, Monk sat down at the piano, turned to a very difficult piece, and started playing it at breakneck speed. His hands were a blur, she recalled decades later. Then, after he was through, he jumped up from the piano and just started grinning. So then I asked, "You didn't play that right." So sorry. So then I said, "You didn't play that right." "What? What are you talking about? I played it 10 times faster than anyone could." Teeny sassed back. "It is supposed to be played adagio, and you played it allegro." Monk loved that kind of one-upmanship, the playful banter, challenges from those who weren't afraid to engage him. And he was proud of his family, including Teeny's burgeoning knowledge of music. For well over half a century, the press and the critics have portrayed Monk as eccentric, mad, childlike, brooding, naive, intuitive, primitive, even taciturn. As Nate Hentoff, one of the few critics who got to know Monk, observed, Monk became a stock cartoon figure for writers of Sunday supplement pieces about the exotica of jazz. Pictures of Monk in dark glasses and goatee would usually be captioned "Mad Monk" or "The High Priest of Bop." Exaggerated stories of his personal life were the substance of the articles. There was no attempt to discuss the nature or seriousness of his musical intentions. Journalist Louis Lapin's sympathetic portrait of Monk for the Saturday Evening Post is typical of much of the writing about Monk. He described Thelonious as an emotional and intuitive man, possessing a child's vision of the world. Monk talks, sleeps, eats, laughs, walks, or dances as the spirit moves him. He was said to be uncommunicative, and music was the only way he would communicate. He supposedly lived in his own little world, exiled from reality, and had no interest in anything except for his music and himself. The only music that interested him was his own, or the pop tunes and old standards that he transformed into his own idiom. Even his fans and defenders made authoritative statements about Monk's lack of interest and or knowledge of other musical genres, especially classical music. In what was intended to be a genuine compliment, French critic André Hodier insisted that this true jazzman had no interest in serious music. He assured his readers that, quote, "No 12-tone sirens have lured Monk away from jazz. He probably doesn't even know that much music exists. I can safely say that the gradual development of his language has been the result of intuition and intuition alone," end quote. Pianist, critic, and educator John Megan said much the same thing in a 1963 essay. Quote, "The entire body of resources of Western man," he mused, relating to the playing of the piano, which dates back to the 16th century, remains unknown to Thelonious Spear Monk for the simple reason that Monk is not a Western man. He is a black man, end quote. Even fellow jazz pianist Bill Evans famously stated that Monk's, quote, "unique and astoundingly pure music," end quote, can be explained by his lack of, quote, "exposure to the Western classical music tradition, or for that matter, comprehensive exposure to any music other than jazz, excuse me, and American popular music," end quote. Quincy Jones extended the myth of pure genius to Monk's entire interaction with the world, as if he were a sealed fermentation vat. Quote, "He is not familiar with many classical works or with much life outside himself. And I think because of this, he did not create on a contrived or inhibited basis," end quote. The myth is as attractive as it is absurd. The truth is, Thelonious Monk possessed an impressive knowledge of and appreciation for Western classical music, not to mention an encyclopedic knowledge of hymns and gospel music, American popular songs, and a variety of obscure art songs that defy easy categorization. For him, it was all music. Once in 1966, a flanks of reporters in Helsinki pressed Monk about his thoughts on classical music and whether or not jazz and classical can come together. His drummer, Ben Riley, watched the conversation unfold. Quote, everyone wanted him to answer, give some type of definition between classical music and jazz. So he says, two is one. And that stopped the whole room. No one else said anything else. End quote. Two is one indeed. Monk loved Frédéric Chopin, Sergei Rachmaninoff, Beethoven, and Bach. Rachmaninoff, I've never gotten that right, so no offense. Beethoven and Bach. And like many of his peers of the bebop generation, he took an interest in Igor Stravinsky. And his life was no more monastic than any other urban jazzman's. Indeed, it was far more colorful and interesting than a true monk's. The myths surrounding Monk have gotten in the way of the truth, and the truth about his life and music is fascinating and complicated, and no less original or creative than the myth. Monk wasn't born with some kind of natural musical knowledge and ability, nor was he entirely self-taught, though he did have perfect pitch. He received a formidable music education and worked very hard to achieve his distinctive sound. Nor did he withdraw to an isolated music meditation away from the world. It took a village to raise Monk, a village populated by formal music teachers, local musicians from the San Juan Hill neighborhood of New York in which he grew up, an itinerant preacher, a range of friends, and collaborators who helped facilitate his own musical studies and exploration, and a very large extended family willing to pitch in and sacrifice a great deal so that Thelonious could pursue a life of uncompromising creativity. He drew inspiration, ideas, and lessons from family members, daily experience, joys and hardships, and the city itself, its sounds, its colors, its drama. Hence, this book is not just about him or his music. Rather, it is an intimate story about the folks who helped shape him. His hardworking and devoted mother, Barbara, his wife, Nellie, and her entire family, their children, his brother and sister and their kids, his musical kith and kin, his patron saint and friend, the Baroness Nika de Koningswater, his childhood friends and first crushes, the people of the local community center, his ancestors and the legacy they bestowed upon him, not to mention the agents, managers, producers, critics, judges, cops, attorneys, and others whose actions and decisions directly affected Monk's livelihood. Thelonious Monk was very much of the world, at least until mental and physical illness finally caused him to withdraw, making his world seem much smaller, self-contained, and at times impenetrable. For most of his life, he remained engaged and fascinated with his surroundings. Politics, art, commerce, nature, architecture, history were not beyond his ken, and Monk was the kind of man who loved a good debate, despite stories of his inability to communicate. Fortunately, many of his close friends and family members have been willing to share their stories, most of which have never been told before in print. They revealed a startlingly different Thelonious Monk, witty, incredibly generous, intensely family-oriented, curious, critical, and brutally honest. In addition, Monk himself was frequently captured on tape, telling stories, debating, or just shooting the breeze. The tapes were made by his friend and supporter, the Baroness Nika de Koningswater, the photographer W. Eugene Smith, at whose loft Monk's big band often rehearsed, or by his wife Nellie. Such tapes are a biographer's dream, for they capture impromptu conversations and ideas unmediated by interviewers or media outlets. One of those recordings, made by W. Eugene Smith during a big band rehearsal in June of 1964, called Monk in a funny conversation about the power of porpoises. Overhearing soprano saxophonist Steve Lacy talk about his friend, trombonist Roswell Rudd, getting a job at the Library of Congress working for Alan Lomax, organizing recording music from around the world, Monk's ears perked up. Monk pressed Lacy for details, and Lacy in turn explained to Monk that he was listening to, quote, Eskimo music, the wildest African blink you've ever heard, Chinese music, even the music of porpoises, end quote. Monk then explained to the room, quote, they say if you can ever make a tape of a porpoise and play it back down slow enough, it's the same as the human voice. They are so close to the human species because they have the same box here pointing to his throat. After explaining that they communicate at very high frequencies, Monk performs a pretty convincing imitation of a porpoise cry. He then launches into a lecture about how man might benefit from harnessing the porpoise's, the porpoise's ability, to sense everything around them. Quote, you know, it's an amazing thing to study the porpoises. With the study of the porpoise, they're going to find out possibilities of completely obliterating a blind man's stick. They'll walk down the street blind as a bat and naked. They'll put a little sonar thing in his ear or something that is able to tell when you're getting up to anything, the kind of object, the texture of the object, whether it's a building or a person. It could tell that it's either a hard surface or cloth because they've checked out porpoises and they can't figure out. They hadn't been able to figure out why a porpoise can swim in dark, murky waters so you can't see, so you can't see nothing at all, and they won't hit a thing. He said something a little colorful. Other tapes are more intimate, like the tapes Nellie made of Monk rehearsing at home. These tapes reveal Monk's deep and abiding love of this music. Mrs. Monk's delight in listening to her husband and the joy they both derive from each other's company. Between and during songs, the recorder captures snippets of a love affair. Sometimes they joke with one another or simply conversed about how to work the tape recorder. Other times, Nellie sang along in unison with the piano. Monk had evident trust in her knowledge and opinions about music, as well as in her ability to run the tape machine, even when she was just learning how to work it. These tapes are windows into more than Monk's music. They reveal Monk as both a comic and a romantic. He had a tremendous sense of humor, and he deeply loved old songs. At the end of a tender rendition of Tea for Two, he turned to Nellie and asked, with even greater tenderness, were you recording that? The critics who interviewed him backstage or observed him dancing across the bandstand missed these signs of Monk. Like most people, he was not one to unveil himself to strangers. Sometimes Monk's eccentric public behavior was a way of salvaging whatever private life he had left. As he once told the writer Frank London Brown, quote, you know, people have tried to put me off as being crazy. Sometimes it's to your advantage for people to think you're crazy, end quote. He got a kick out of fooling people, particularly those whom he thought were too lazy or afraid to think for themselves. One of his favorite pranks was to stare intensely at a spot on the ceiling or in the sky, either in a crowded room or on a street corner. Invariably, several people would look up with him, searching for what elusive object apparently fascinated him. It was an experiment in mass psychology that brought him great amusement. But not all of Monk's bizarre actions were artifice. Thelonious suffered from bipolar disorder, the signs of which are evident as early as the 1940s. But by the early 1960s, just as he began to earn the fame and recognition that had eluded him for the first 2 decades of his career, various mental and physical ailments began to take an even greater toll. exacerbated by poor medical treatment, an unhealthy lifestyle, the daily stresses of a working jazz musician, and an unending financial and creative battle with the music industry. Some writers romanticize manic depression and or schizophrenia as characteristics of creative genius, but the story of Monk's physical and mental ailments is essentially a tragedy, a story of his slow decline and the pain it caused to those closest to him. Its manifestations were episodic, so he continued to function and make incredible music up until the day of his retirement in 1976. During these nearly 20 years, his ability to lead a band and to dig out fresh interpretation of compositions he had been playing for decades, in spite of his illness and a protracted struggle with the industry, was astonishing. Excuse me. 3 decades ago, when I was young, messing around with piano and studying bass slightly more seriously, my new stepfather, Paul, a professional tenor sax player, had me listen to Monk and Johnny Griffin perform Evidence. Soon I memorized everyone's solo on that record, including Roy Haynes' unaccompanied snare drum rolls, which is impossible to approximate verbally without spraying spittle on anyone standing within 5 feet of my mouth. I became completely obsessed with Monk's sound, his clang-clang sound of surprise, rich with deafening silences, dissonances, and harmonic ambiguities. It was that ice cream truck sound, Monk, the good humor man. I worked on that sound on piano, from Monk's blues and intricate and lovely ballads to his up-tempo numbers, which nearly put me in the hospital. His sound seemed beyond my grasp, beyond my comprehension. I played more notes. I played fewer notes. I changed the chord voicings. I played in front of the beat. I danced around the beat and finally gave up and retreated to rubato. I listened and listened some more. I even summoned him from the ancestors to help, and he came to me in a dream. Decked out in divine alligator shoes, a dark green silk suit, yellow tie, bamboo sunglasses, and a cold straw hat. He snuck up behind me as I hunched over my stepfather's Steinway upright, looked over my shoulder, and simply mumbled, "You're making the wrong mistakes." Here, more humbly, is an attempt to evoke his world in words, not music. Monk consistently and boldly spoke the truth, no matter whose feelings were hurt. One of his favorite mantras was always no, adding that the word no was Monk spelled backward with the W inverted. He often illustrated the point with a huge custom-made ring that had Monk emblazoned across the top in diamonds, turning it upside down in case you didn't know. In case you didn't know it. I'm sorry, in case you didn't get it. Always know. Always know. This book is my attempt to know Monk, the man behind the mystique. And now we're going to read a little bit of portion from My Mother Didn't Want Me to Grow Up in North Carolina, because it's very important, I think, to understanding the genesis of Monk. Slavery, freedom, birth, exodus. Thelonious Monk had much to celebrate on October the 10th, 1957. It was his 40th birthday, and after more than 2 decades of scuffling, his career was on an upswing. He had a regular engagement at the Five Spot Cafe in New York City, his first steady gig in several years. When he opened there 3 months earlier, Monk had just begun to emerge from relative obscurity. Now he was the jazz world's hottest ticket, and the small East Village bar had become one of the hippest joints in the city. Adoring fans, hipsters, bohemians, and wannabes lined up outside the narrow storefront club at 5 Cooper Square, hoping to catch Monk and his legendary quartet, John Coltrane, bassist Ahmed Abdul Malik, and drummer Shadow Wilson. That night, Monk wanted to celebrate. Friends, family, and enthusiastic fans surrounded him. His years, as his wife Nellie used to call them, were about to end. Further uptown on West 56th Street near Fifth Avenue, another Monk, Julius Withers Monk, also had something to celebrate. On that same Thursday night, Julius Monk's latest opus, a musical comedy revue entitled Take Five, opened at Upstairs at the Downstairs to excellent reviews. Known to the entertainment world as a fine pianist, satirist, male model, producer, and a bit of an eccentric, Julius Monk had worked at the famed number 1 Fifth Avenue bar during the 1930s and gigged in France before becoming musical director of Le Ruban Bleu, a popular supper club in 1943. In the 1950s, he founded the Downstairs Room and subsequently launched Upstairs at the Downstairs as a combination theater/supper club where he produced several acclaimed comic revues. Thelonious and Julius probably knew of each other. In every issue of the directory for Local 802 of the American Federation of Musicians, Thelonious' name followed Julius's in the listing of pianists. They shared a lot more than the piano, the union, a reputation for eccentricity, Latinate first names, and the same surname. Both hailed from North Carolina. Julius from Salisbury in Rowan County. He was born in 1912. Thelonious from Rocky Mount in Edgecombe County, born in 1917. Their geographical origins are not accidental. A century earlier, Julius's great-grandfather, Archibald Monk, had enslaved Thelonious's great-grandfather, John Jack Monk. Julius Withers Monk took great interest in studying his family's past. During the 1940s, he conducted extensive genealogical research and even commissioned a scholar to produce a detailed family tree of the Monks. Yet, he was only interested in the monks that looked like him, not the 19 slaves his great-granddaddy owned in 1860. Had he known this history, he might have been inspired to head down to the 5 spot after his show and thank Thelonious personally for the privileged life he was able to enjoy. The son of one of Salisbury's wealthiest landowners, Dr. Lawrence Monk, Sr., Julius grew up in a well-to-do family and attended the Peabody Institute in Baltimore and the Cincinnati Conservatory. Julius's excellent musical education, like his father's and brother's medical school education, was partly paid for with inherited wealth, the source of which turned out to be the sweat and toil of John Jack Monk and the other African-descended people held in bondage. While Julius grew up in affluence, Thelonious had been born into extreme poverty. His mother and grandmother spent their lives scrubbing floors for a living, and his father, Thelonious Sr., cobbled together work as an unskilled day laborer in the railroad town of Rocky Mount. His grandfathers had lived a life of debt peonage, sharecropping for ex-slave masters, and surviving pretty much from mill to mill. Yet, Monk inherited more than poverty. His family passed down a rich cultural, intellectual, and political legacy, a legacy that shaped his music and his worldview in both profound and subtle ways. The vestiges of slavery were everywhere in the Jim Crow South. More important than the memory of slavery, however, was the memory of freedom. The 2 generations that preceded the 2 generations that preceded the Theloniouses lived through one of the greatest revolutions and counter-revolutions in the history of the modern world. Thelonious, his sister Marion, and brother Thomas were raised by people for whom freedom had tangible meaning. They heard firsthand stories of emancipation from their parents, stories of Black men going to the polls and running for office, of former slaves founding churches and schools and helping to build a new democracy in the southern states. For any Southern Black person living between 1865 and 1900, freedom wasn't a word taken for granted or used abstractly. As Thelonious' parents in turn passed to him, freedom meant more than breaking the rules of musical harmony or bending tempos. His grandparents were part of freedom's first generation of African Americans, a generation that could dream of a good life under a hopeful democracy. Yet his parents watched that democracy and their freedom burn, sometimes literally, under assault by white supremacists as Jim Crow laws descended across the South. The disfranchisement of black folk and the restoration of power to the old planter class was rapid and violent. Like many families, the monks never lost their memory of post Civil War freedom or their determination to possess it again. Thelonious Monk's music is essentially about freedom. He inherited much from those who came before him, not least a deeply felt understanding of freedom. His story begins with their song. This has been our selection today, Thelonious Monk, The Life and Times of an American Original by author Robin D.G. Kelley. It is a lovely look into the life of a musical legend, and I highly encourage that you get a copy and read. We do a lot of reading in preparation for our days. Sometimes we read whole stories, sometimes we're reading parts of books just to make sure that we have a good understanding of what the story is about. But we get stories that grip you, and this is one that really is just so very enlightening because of the way that it's written. It really is, as the author says, it gives life to someone typically seen as aloof. And in his own words, as he says, people like to make him think that people like to portray him as crazy. And he thought it was to his advantage sometimes to pretend to be so. And so this is a wonderful book. And so we want you to go out, take a look, and let's put up our cover. Let me make sure I put up our cover and show you what our book looks like, our selection for today, which is Thelonious Monk, The Life and Times of an American Original by Robin D.G. Kelley. Good book. Good book. Okay. And so we are back to let you know about the International Great Black Read Aloud Day. Today was jazz and music. Our selection has been Thelonious Monk, The Life and Times of an American Original. And we'll be back tomorrow with day 17, which is our Children's Literature Day. We expect to have some little people. I call kids, I like to call them little people. They're little people with brains and thoughts and imaginations of their own. And so we'll be back tomorrow, hopefully with some little people to join us to read aloud on Children's Lit Day. If you're an author of children's literature and you like to read, or you just like to share your books, if you're an illustrator of children's lit for Black books, I'm being very specific here. If you are a Black illustrator of Black children's books, please just feel free to chime in and post or share something with us. Tag us, the International Great Black Read Aloud Day, and we'll give a shout out for your book tomorrow, because we believe that literacy is a legacy. That's what we believe here. With our partner, that's the slogan for the Fresh Book Festival. But we partner with the Fresh Book Festival to bring these readings to you, because we really believe that literacy is a legacy, and it starts with our young people in teaching them how to read and to comprehend what they read. Young people who read do much better in school than kids who don't. It's just a fact. Okay. So they have the opportunity because they're using their imaginations, and so they have an opportunity to learn more. Reading is essential. It is essential. So if you can, teach your young people how to read. Spend some time reading with them at home. But we'll talk more about that tomorrow, because tomorrow is day 17. Children's literature. Today has been day 16, jazz and music. Our selection was Thelonious Monk, The Life and Times of an American Original by Robin D.G. Kelley. We will see you tomorrow for another installation of the International Great Black Read Aloud Day 2026 version. We're 6 years in, and we are still excited about giving voice to words written by Black people all around the world. We will see you tomorrow. Have